Cat rescued a bobcat kitten from the forest storm. What happened after shocked its owner? Deep in the forests of Montana, where the pines grew so thick that even midday felt like dusk. A violent storm was rolling in, with the kind of fury that made old-timers shake their heads and mutter about the worst they'd seen in decades. The sky had turned the color of a bruise. In a den carved beneath the roots of an ancient spruce, a mother bobcat was in the middle of a crisis. She had given birth only hours before. Three tiny kittens still wet and mewling, their eyes sealed shut, their bodies barely larger than field mice. Water was seeping through the root system, pooling on the den floor, rising with terrifying speed, gripping the first kitten in her jaws. She scrambled up through the collapsing entrance and into the hellscape outside. Thunder cracked overhead with such force she felt it in her bones. The second kitten joined the first in her mouth, their tiny bodies dangling as she ran, back again for the third. But the ground had become a river, and as she leaped over what should have been a small, seasonal creek, her paw landed on a rock slick with moss and rain. She stumbled. The kitten slipped from her grasp. For one frozen heartbeat, she saw its tiny body tumbling through the air, and then it hit the water and was swept downstream in a current moving faster than any bobcat could run. She stood there, the other two kittens safe in her mouth making sounds of distress. The water rose higher, lapping at her legs now. The lost kitten was already out of sight around a bend. The mother bobcat turned away from the creek and ran, disappearing into the curtain of rain with the kittens she could still save, leaving one behind to whatever mercy the storm might offer. 3 miles away as the crow flies, in a small wooden cabin tucked at the very edge of where the forest gave way to a clearing, Ray Talbot was trying to read. The book was one Margaret, his wife who passed away 6 years ago, had loved. On the windowsill, stretched in the last golden light of what had been a beautiful autumn afternoon, lay Bun, the golden American short hair with fur that seemed to glow in the sunlight and amber eyes that missed nothing. 10 years old and still moving like he was half that age. Ray looked up from the book. He wasn't really reading and watched Bun's ears swivel toward the window. The cat's tail twitched once, twice. Ray felt the air pressure change, that strange hollow feeling in his ears that meant a serious storm was building. The radio on the kitchen counter crackled and switched to the automated emergency broadcast system. Category 3 storm systems moving faster than anticipated. Potential for flash flooding, dangerous lightning activity. Seek shelter immediately. Ray closed the book and stood up, his knees protesting. The wind hit him immediately, colder than it had any right to be in early autumn. A sound cut through the wind, high-pitched, desperate, barely audible over the growing roar. Ray froze, his heart suddenly hammering. Every nerve in his body went on alert, old reflexes kicking in. That sound. He knew that sound. Something small and alive and in terrible danger. Then Bun shot past him like a golden arrow, leaping off the porch and disappearing into the tree line before Ray could even shout his name. Bun! The word came out, strangled, panic immediate and overwhelming. His vision started to tunnel, his chest seized up. Not again, not again. He couldn't lose someone else to water and storm. Ray's body locked up completely, muscles going rigid with the same paralysis that had gripped him in therapy sessions for years after his retirement. 20 years in search and rescue had left its marks, both visible and otherwise. Post-traumatic stress disorder, the doctors call it. His therapist had taught him breathing exercises, grounding techniques, ways to talk himself down from the edge. But standing there in the rising wind with rain beginning to fall in fat, cold drops, watching the forest swallow his cat, all of those carefully learned skills vanished like smoke. The storm intensified with shocking speed. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Ray's legs started to shake from holding the same rigid position, but he couldn't make himself move. When Bun finally appeared, moving more slowly than usual but moving, Ray's knees actually buckled. The cat was absolutely drenched, his usually fluffy coat matted flat against his body. But that wasn't what made Ray's breath stop completely. Bun was carrying something in his mouth, something small and dark and completely motionless. Bun climbed the porch steps with careful precision, and Ray dropped to his knees to meet him. The cat walked right up to Ray's blanket near the wood stove and gently placed his burden on it. A bobcat kitten, eyes still sealed shut, fur plastered down to reveal skin that looked gray instead of pink. Its tiny body was completely limp, and along its right hind leg was a long scratch, bleeding sluggishly. Jesus, Ray whispered. Bun immediately went to work, arranging the blanket with his paws, creating a nest. But before settling in, he moved close to the kitten and started licking the wound on its leg. Not random grooming, but focused, deliberate attention to that specific injury. His tongue worked over the cut with a precision that caught Ray completely off guard, cleaning away dirt and debris, his movements as careful as any medic Ray had ever worked with. Ray started to intervene, worried about infection. But something made him pause. Bun's body language was completely calm, utterly focused. The cat knew exactly what he was doing. "All right," Ray finally said, his voice rough. "All right, we're doing this." His training kicked in, pushing aside the panic. Ray had pulled people from situations where they shouldn't have survived. A newborn bobcat kitten was just another mission, just another life hanging in the balance. He grabbed the softest towel he could find and carefully lifted the kitten. The creature's body was ice cold, no response to touch, barely any sign of breathing. Ray checked for a heartbeat, pressing his fingers gently against the tiny chest. There. Faint and fast and irregular. But there, Mash. He began drying the kitten with careful efficiency, patting rather than rubbing. Bun supervised from 2 feet away, his yellow eyes tracking every movement. When Ray had gotten as much water off as possible, Bun immediately moved in again and resumed cleaning the wound. The bleeding had already slowed, the cut looking cleaner, less angry. Ray watched in fascination as the cat worked with methodical precision. The cabin was already warm from the wood stove, but Ray added more logs until the temperature climbed towards uncomfortable. Hypothermia was the immediate threat. He filled 2 hot water bottles, wrapped them in dish towels, and arranged them on either side of the kitten, not touching her directly, just close enough to provide ambient warmth. Bun settled himself against the kitten's back, his larger body creating a living blanket. The cat began to purr, a deep rumbling sound that Ray could feel in the floorboards. Ray pulled his reading chair closer and sat down. Knowing this was going to be a long night, he needed to prepare food, something appropriate for a newborn carnivore. He remembered something from a rescue mission years ago, a village where flooding had separated nursing mothers from their infants. The makeshift formula they'd used: boiled water, a tiny amount of sugar for energy, salt for electrolytes. It wasn't nutrition, but it could keep someone alive long enough. Ray prepared the mixture with careful focus, measuring precisely, boiling everything, letting it cool to just above body temperature. He found a syringe in his first aid kit, the kind without a needle, meant for irrigating wounds, perfect for administering drops to something too small to drink on its own. When he returned to the stove, the kitten still hadn't moved. Ray knelt beside her, and Bun shifted slightly to give him access but didn't move away. Ray tested the formula temperature against his inner wrist and found it just right, carefully. He used one hand to support the tiny head and brought the syringe to her mouth with the other. "Come on," he whispered. "Just a little." He squeezed gently, releasing a single drop onto the kitten's tongue. No response. Another drop. Nothing. Ray's chest tightened. He kept going, patient and steady. 1 drop every 10 seconds. After maybe 20 drops, he saw her throat move. Just a flutter, barely visible. But there, she was swallowing. "That's it," Ray breathed. "Keep going." He managed to get perhaps a teaspoon of liquid into her over the next 20 minutes before stopping. It wasn't much, but it was something. He checked the hot water bottles, adjusting their position, checking the kitten's temperature by feel. Still too cold, but maybe fractionally less so. The storm raged outside, wind screaming around the cabin's corners, rain hammering the roof in waves. Lightning painted the windows white every few minutes. Inside the cabin, in a small circle of warmth and light, Three creatures waited out the darkness together. Ray dozed in his chair, waking every 30 minutes to check on the kitten, to try administering more formula. Bun never slept, never moved except to continue his careful cleaning of that wound, his body a constant source of warmth. Around midnight, Ray's exhaustion caught up with him. His hands started shaking, fine tremors that made it difficult to hold the syringe steady. He was checking the kitten's temperature when Bun suddenly stood up and walked over to Ray. The cat pressed his head against Ray's knee and just stood there, solid and warm and utterly calm. Ray put his hand on Bun's back, feeling the steady purr. "I know," he said quietly. "I know, buddy." Bun stayed there for a long moment, then returned to his position beside the kitten, and somehow Ray felt steadier. The old military jacket hung on the back of a nearby chair, the one he'd worn through 3 tours, the one he couldn't bring himself to get rid of despite the stains that never quite washed out. Blood and mud and chemicals, the residue of things he'd seen and done and survived. On impulse, Ray stood and grabbed the jacket. He'd wrapped this around wounded soldiers going into shock, had used it as a pillow for dying men who needed something soft. Ray brought it back to the stove and carefully wrapped it around the tiny Bobcat kitten. The fabric still smelled faintly of gun oil and wood smoke. "If you live," Ray whispered, "then maybe this jacket finally means something good." The words felt like a prayer, like the most honest thing he'd said out loud in 2 years. He settled back in his chair and pulled a blanket around his shoulders. The storm continued its assault, but inside the circle of warmth, time seemed to move differently. Ray found himself drifting in and out of a strange half-sleep, caught in fragments of memory. Margaret reading in the evening light, his partner's laugh before that last mission. Bun's purr was a constant anchor, pulling Ray back whenever he drifted too far into dark places. Dawn came slowly, gray light seeping through the windows. The storm had finally exhausted itself. Ray's head had drooped forward onto his chest when a sound pulled him back to consciousness. A whimper, high and thin and unmistakably alive. Ray's eyes snapped open. Bun's head was up, ears forward, his whole body alert. And there, wrapped in the old military jacket, the Bobcat kitten was moving. Just slightly, just the tiniest shift of position. But movement. Her mouth opened and she made that sound again. A tiny cry that was definitely, undeniably alive. Ray was out of his chair and on his knees beside her before he consciously decided to move. His hands shook as he carefully unwrapped the jacket. Her skin had color now, pink showing through where the fur was still damp. Her tiny chest rose and fell with breaths that were shallow but steady. Something broke open in Ray's chest, something that had been locked tight since the day they lowered Margaret into the ground. Tears ran down his face and he didn't try to stop them. Bun moved closer, pressing against Ray's leg, purring so loud it sounded like a small engine. Ray put one hand on the kitten and one hand on Bun and let himself cry. Not from grief, but from relief so profound it felt like being turned inside out. "You made it," he whispered. "You stubborn little thing. You made it." The kitten made another sound, and Ray tried out the name that had come to him in the dark hours. "Ray, your name is Ray." As morning light grew stronger, Ray prepared more formula and managed to get Ray to take several syringes full. She was weak but responsive now. Her tiny paw Bun supervised every movement, his approval or disapproval clear in his body language. The days that followed developed a rhythm that felt both exhausting and strangely purposeful, feeding every 2 hours around the clock, keeping the cabin temperature constant, monitoring Ray's breathing, her heart rate, the healing of that scratch. Ray moved through each task with the focus of someone who'd found a mission again, a reason to pay attention. Bun was extraordinary. He rarely left Ray's side except to eat or use his litter box, when Ray was too exhausted to keep his eyes open. Bun would position himself between Ray and Ray, creating a bridge. When Ray was restless, Bun would groom her with long, steady licks until she settled. On the 4th day, Ray bundled Ray carefully and drove into town to see Doc Harrison. The veterinarian had been treating animals in these mountains for 40 years, but his eyebrows still climbed when Ray walked in with a Bobcat kitten wrapped in towels. "Found her after the big storm," Ray explained. Doc Harrison examined Ray thoroughly, checking her eyes, ears, mouth, listening to her heart and lungs, examining that scratch on her hind leg. This wound, he said thoughtfully, something cleaned it pretty thoroughly, probably saved her from infection. Bobcat kittens are fragile. A wound like this, left untreated, would have turned septic in a day or two, likely would have killed her. Ray thought of Bun working at that cut with focused intensity. My cat did that, he said quietly. Bun, he's the one who found her, brought her home. He cleaned that cut before I even thought to. Doc Harrison studied Ray for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Your cat might have saved this little girl's life then. He finished his examination, giving Ray detailed feeding instructions and proper formula. She's got a fighting chance now, better than she had any right to expect. He paused, his expression growing serious. But you know she's wild, right? No matter how tame she seems, she's got instincts that are going to wake up as she grows. I know, Ray said. But as he drove home with Ray sleeping against his chest, he also knew that the knowing didn't make it any easier. Ray grew with shocking speed. Her eyes opened on day 12, revealing the most stunning gold-green color Ray had ever seen. By 3 weeks, she was wobbling around on legs that seemed too long for her body, exploring the cabin in careful increments. And through it all, Bun was there, every stumbling step, every small adventure, every moment of panic. The golden cat was a constant presence. Ray watched them together and saw something he hadn't expected. Bun wasn't just keeping Ray alive. He was teaching her. When Ray tried to climb and fell, Bun was underneath to break her fall, but he didn't coddle her. He'd wait until she tried again, letting her learn through experience. When Ray got tangled in a blanket and panicked, Bun calmly pulled the fabric away with his teeth, then walked away as if to say, see, not so scary. The first rainstorm after Ray's eyes opened revealed a trauma Ray hadn't anticipated. It was late afternoon when the sound of rain on the roof began, just a light drizzle at first. Ray was playing with a piece of rope when thunder rumbled in the distance, and Ray froze. Her ears flattened, her pupils dilated. She started to shake, her whole body trembling, and then she bolted. Scrambling under Ray's bed with a cry that sounded like pure terror, Ray started to go after her. But Bun was faster. The cat dropped to his belly and crawled under the bed. Ray crouched down to watch. Bun maneuvered his body until he was pressed shoulder to shoulder with Ray, then began rubbing his head against hers in long, slow, deliberate movements. His purr was audible even from several feet away. Ray continued shaking, her breathing fast and shallow. Clearly caught in fear she was too young to understand. Bun just stayed there, solid and warm and calm, his body language completely relaxed. Ray sat back on his heels, recognition washing over him. He'd done this exact thing countless times with young recruits during their first real missions, stayed close during moments of panic, lending his presence until their own courage caught up. Bun was passing on that same gift now, human to cat to wildcat. The chain continued. Fear transformed into calm through simple presence. The thunder continued, growing closer, and Ray's shaking gradually subsided. She pressed closer to Bun, borrowing his calm, and eventually her breathing slowed. By the time the storm passed, she was asleep under the bed, her spotted body curled against Bun's golden one. Ray sat on the floor nearby, his back against the wall, and felt tears tracking down his face. As autumn turned toward winter, Ray's personality emerged fully. She was curious about everything, fearless in her explorations, and possessed reflexes that made Bun look slow by comparison. She'd stalk dust motes with deadly seriousness, pounce on imaginary prey with impressive precision, and climb furniture with confidence that gave Ray small heart attacks. Bun took on the role of teacher with apparent seriousness. He introduced Ray to hunting through play, dragging out his old rope toys and demonstrating how to stalk, pounce, and deliver a killing bite. Ray attacked the toys with savage intensity, but she had no control. She'd go in too hard, too fast, all claws and teeth and chaos. Bun would stop the game immediately, sitting back and refusing to continue until Ray calmed down. Then he'd demonstrate again, slow and precise, showing her how to pull her claws, how to control the strength of her bite. She started checking herself mid-pounce, moderating her strength, using precision instead of just raw power. Ray watched these lessons with fascination, recognizing the same principles from combat training. Bun was teaching Ray to be a better predator, but also a safer one. The three of them developed routines that felt choreographed. Every morning, Ray would wake to find Bun and Ray playing elaborate games. Every afternoon, they'd pile into Ray's reading chair, Ray reading aloud while both animals dozed. And every evening at 9 o'clock, something extraordinary happened. Bun would walk to the kitchen, sitting beside the stove, just as he'd done every night since Margaret died. It was her ritual, her nightly cup of chamomile tea, brewed at exactly 9 o'clock. Bun had watched her do it for 9 years, and when she was gone, he'd continued going to the kitchen at that same time. Ray had never tried to break him of the habit because it felt like keeping Margaret's memory alive. But now Ray was following Bun on these evening trips. The Bobcat Kitten would trail after the golden cat and sit beside him by the stove for exactly 5 minutes before they both returned together. Ray watched this ritual develop and felt his throat close up every single time. Three creatures, three species, joined in wordless remembrance for someone only one of them had known. One afternoon in late October, Ray was in the kitchen preparing sandwiches when he turned his back. He heard a startled meow from Bun and spun around just in time to see Ray, moving with impossible speed, snatch an entire sandwich in her jaws and launch herself onto the top of the kitchen cabinet in one fluid leap. She crouched up there, sandwich hanging from her mouth, looking absurdly pleased with herself. "Hey," Ray shouted, trying to sound stern. "That's for people who pay taxes, kid." Ray just stared down at him, chewing her stolen sandwich. Bun sat on the table's edge, his expression somehow managing to convey complete innocence. His face said, "I have no idea what just happened. I was somewhere else entirely." Ray looked between his unrepentant bobcat and his suspiciously neutral cat and started laughing, actually laughing, the kind that came from his belly and made his eyes water. The sound filled the cabin, pushing back against the silence that had lived there for so long. And for a moment, he could almost feel Margaret laughing with him. But Ray was noticing other changes, too. Bun was slowing down. The cat moved more stiffly after sleeping, his back legs taking a few minutes to warm up. He was spending more time in sunny spots and by the windows, less time exploring, when Ray got too rambunctious. Bun would sometimes just walk away, and Ray could see the effort it took. He made an appointment with Doc Harrison. The exam was thorough, the diagnosis expected but still hit hard: arthritis, common in older cats. Nothing life-threatening, but progressive, painful. Doc Harrison prescribed supplements and gave Ray a look that held both sympathy and understanding. "He's 11 now. Ray, that's pretty good. You're doing everything right. But we can't stop time." Ray drove home with one hand resting on Bun's back, feeling the steady purr. "I know, buddy," Ray said softly. "I know it hurts. We'll make you comfortable." That night, he set up a heated pad in Bun's favorite sleeping spot, added extra padding to their shared chair. Ray watched too, her gold-green eyes tracking Bun's movements with unusual intensity. The young bobcat had been growing more independent, exploring further from the cabin. But that night, she stayed close to Bun, her body language unusually subdued. The next afternoon, Ray found them in a patch of weak November sunlight by the window. Bun was curled up in his bed, clearly sore, his breathing shallow. Ray lay pressed against him, not playing or demanding attention. Just present, as Ray watched, barely breathing. Ray began grooming Bun's ears with careful licks, the same way Bun had groomed her when she was tiny and helpless. The reversal was so perfect, so full of unspoken gratitude and love, that Ray had to leave the room. He made it to the kitchen before the tears came, standing at the sink with one hand braced against the counter. This was temporary. All of it was temporary. Ray would leave because that's what wild things did. Bun would keep getting older until one day he'd be gone too, and Ray would be alone again. But the grief was different this time. Mixed in with the pain was gratitude. He'd been given this gift, this strange grace period where three impossible creatures became a family. He'd been allowed to save something, to be part of something larger than his own loneliness. He walked back to the living room. Bun and Ray were still in their patch of sunlight, still pressed together. Ray sat down in his reading chair and picked up his book. And for the first time in 2 years, the words on the page actually made sense. That night, lying in bed at 2 in the morning, Ray couldn't sleep. His mind kept cycling through worst-case scenarios. He was spiraling into full panic when he felt weight land on the bed. Ray climbed up carefully, moving with unusual caution. She settled herself against Ray's side, her warmth and solidity immediate and grounding. Ray put one hand on her spotted fur and felt the rumble of her purr travel through his palm. A few minutes later, Bun appeared on the other side, moving slowly but with determination. The cat nestled into the curve of Ray's arm and began purring too, the sound harmonizing with Ray's deeper rumble. Ray lay between them, these two impossible creatures who'd somehow become his anchor to the world, and felt something shift inside his chest. The loneliness didn't disappear, but it became more bearable, something he could carry instead of something that crushed him. In early November, Ray dug through his closet until he found his old film camera, the one Margaret had given him on their 20th anniversary. He hadn't touched it since she died, hadn't been able to bear taking pictures of a world she wasn't in. That afternoon, weak autumn sun found a gap in the clouds and sent light streaming through the windows. Ray looked over and found Bun and Ray both asleep in his reading chair. Arranged in perfect composition, Bun was curled in his usual spot, his golden fur glowing. Ray was draped across the armrest, boneless, one paw resting on Bun's back even in sleep. The trust in that touch made Ray's throat close up. He positioned himself beside the chair, set the camera's timer, and climbed carefully onto the armrest. The camera clicked. Three beings who shouldn't have become family, but did anyway. Preserved in silver and light. Ray developed the film himself that evening in his basement darkroom, watching their faces appear in the developer tray like magic. The photo showed exactly what he'd wanted to preserve. Bun looking tired but content. Ray looking wild but trusting. And Ray looking like someone who'd found his way back from somewhere dark. He had it framed in simple glass and stored it in a wooden box in his closet. Next to Margaret's picture, two families, two versions of home. Winter came hard that year. By early December, snow lay 3 feet deep around the cabin, and Ray kept a careful eye on both his animals. Ray was nearly full-grown now, sleek and powerful, her spotted coat thick against the cold. She spent more time staring out the windows, her body tense with energy that had nowhere to go inside 4 walls. Ray knew what was coming, had known from the beginning. Christmas morning arrived clear and bitterly cold. Ray woke to find Bun standing by his bed, making a sound he'd never heard from the cat before. A low, mournful yowl that sent ice through Ray's veins. He threw on clothes and searched the cabin. Kitchen empty. Living room empty. Ray's favorite sleeping spot by the stove, abandoned. He found the trail almost immediately. Small paw prints in fresh snow. Leading from the back door he must have forgotten to latch completely. Heading straight into the forest, Ray stood on the porch in the freezing dawn, Bun beside him, and watched those tracks disappear into the trees. "She'll be back," Ray said out loud, trying to convince himself. But Bun made that terrible sound again and walked inside, and Ray knew the truth. Days passed, then weeks. Ray kept expecting to hear scratching at the door, to see a spotted face at the window, but Ray was gone. Bun moved through the rooms like he was searching for something he'd lost. And Ray couldn't offer any comfort because he was doing the same thing. He tried to tell himself it was better this way. Ray was wild. She belonged in the forest with her own kind. This was right, natural. But knowing something intellectually didn't stop it from carving a hole in his chest. On a gray January afternoon, Ray took a piece of paper and wrote carefully, "If anyone ever sees a wildcat unafraid of humans, don't fear it. It was once saved by a cat and an old man. And actually, it also saved that cat and that old man." He sealed the letter in a plastic bag, walked to the old oak tree in front of his cabin, and tucked it into a hollow he'd discovered years ago. February brought a thaw, then more snow. Ray and Bun settled back into their old rhythms, the ones from before Ray. But they fit differently now. The silence wasn't comfortable anymore. Every night at 9 o'clock, Bun still walked to the kitchen. But now he sat alone, and the ghost they were honoring felt doubled. Then, on a late autumn afternoon, almost a full year after that first storm, Ray was splitting wood behind the cabin when Bun suddenly went rigid on the porch. The cat's tail bushed out, his ears swiveling forward, every muscle alert. Ray turned, axe forgotten. Ray stood at the edge of the clearing. She was enormous now, easily twice the size she'd been at Christmas. Her coat, lush and healthy, her gold gray eyes sharp with intelligence. She watched Ray for a long moment, then moved forward with liquid grace. Ray's heart hammered. She was wild now, truly wild, and he knew better than anyone how dangerous that could be. But Ray walked straight to him and pressed her head against his outstretched hand, the same gentle gesture she'd used when she was small. Ray's vision blurred. He ran his hand along her neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the fur. "Hey there," he whispered. "Hey, Ray?" Then she moved past him to where Bun waited on the porch. The two of them touched noses, a long moment of connection that needed no translation. Another bobcat emerged from the forest, larger than Ray, older, with scars across her muzzle and one torn ear. She stayed at the tree line, watching, and Ray understood immediately. Ray's mother, somehow, against impossible odds. They'd found each other again. Ray looked back at Ray one more time. Her eyes held something he recognized. "Goodbye, thank you. I'm sorry, but I have to go." Then she turned and walked toward her mother, and the two of them disappeared into the forest as silently as they'd come. Ray stood frozen for a long time, his hand still warm from Ray's touch. The ache in his chest was enormous, but underneath it was something else, something that felt almost like peace. Ray had left the cabin, but she wasn't lost. She had her mother. She had her forest. She had the life she was supposed to live. He sat down heavily on the porch steps, and Bun immediately climbed into his lap, purring loud enough to rattle them both. Ray buried his face in the cat's golden fur and let himself cry. Not from grief, but from a strange, painful gratitude. They'd been given something rare, a chance to save something, to be part of something larger than their own loneliness, to build a family out of impossible pieces. "We did good, didn't we?" Ray asked Bun. The cat's purr intensified. That evening, Ray retrieved the wooden box from his closet. He set it on the kitchen table and opened it carefully. Looking at the two photographs inside, Margaret's warm smile, frozen forever, and the three of them in the chair. A moment of stolen peace. Different families, different kinds of love, but love nonetheless. He made coffee, the good kind Margaret had always insisted on, and sat at the table with Bun in his lap. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle and quiet. The cabin was warm, somewhere in the forest. Ray was learning to hunt with her mother, learning the old paths, becoming fully herself. Ray sipped his coffee and stroked Bun's ears, feeling the cat's weight and warmth, this steady companion who'd been with him through everything, who'd run into a storm to save a stranger, who'd taught a wild thing how to trust and be gentle, and also when to let go. "Just you and me now," Ray said softly. Bun's purr said yes, and also, "That's enough." And in the growing darkness, with snow falling outside and warmth inside, Ray discovered he believed it. Every rescue begins with a heartbeat that refuses to give up. We're grateful you chose to listen to this one. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, a simple like or subscribe means the world to us.